So essentially I've entitled this Moving from Ideology to Process. There's quite a lot of talk around social innovation. I'm going to throw some wording and definitions and some academic literature at you, and I'll try to be quick and get to the point. But I'd like to see this as a process, and not only as innovation for the sake of innovation. So some of the definitions that float out there, and I'll tell you why we use the term social innovation, why it is an emerging field in the world. There are two definitions, and I'll come to why we prefer the second one, but essentially it talks about novel ideas, novel solutions, products, processes that are more effective, efficient, sustainable, and create value, which accrues to society rather than individuals. It's a fairly standard definition and broad one, which we use quite a lot, but we use the second one a lot more because it also talks about how do we start to change the underlying routines, resources, systems, authority flows, beliefs that we hold around how the world and the world that we operate in are structured. And that's a lot more difficult. You're going to come, and over the course of this conference, you're going to hear some of the terms around social entrepreneurship, social enterprise, and I'll talk about why we use the lens social innovation. So social entrepreneurship is a set of behaviors, practices that are entrepreneurial around addressing social problems. Social enterprise is the legal form for a business. It's the organizational form that carries out that activity. Social innovation transcends the public sector, civil society, transcends business. And so social innovation can happen anywhere. And what we teach our students is that anyone can be a social innovator, whether you're the CEO, or whether you're the junior analyst, or whether you're the cleaner. Right? There is a leverage point for change wherever you are. When you think, I can't change the system around me, look for the crack in the system. And that's what we've got to see, start to change the way we see the things around us. So, sexy new term, who knows if the term will still be around in a decade to come, but it's a useful label that we're using now. My slide here is to remind me that just because we're using a new label doesn't mean these things haven't been around for a very long time. Kindergartens, 100 years ago, in 1913, were considered totally revolutionary. Nowadays we accept them as a kind of form of good practice. Friedrich Froelich was his name. In 1840, actually developed what he called kindergartens, a garden for children to grow like plants. And he inspired and influenced people like Montessori, Steiner, the Waldorf schools, and basically the origins of early childhood development. No one would argue with that today, that early childhood development is an important part of the educational process. Again, 100 years ago, only 2 countries in the world had given women full right to vote. Nationally. Does anyone know which 2 countries those were? We've got a winner here. Australia and New Zealand. Which one was first? New Zealand, very good. If I had some chocolates, I'd be handing them out. Good. So, essentially, these things have been around for a long time. And things that we take for granted today were once innovations that someone tried to implement and probably failed many times and probably had people telling them that they were crazy, and eventually they persisted. Semmelweis. Does anyone know who Semmelweis was? He was an obstetrician who decided that there were 2 maternity wards, one with a really high death rate, an infection rate, and one with a much better one. He noticed that the nurses were washing their hands in one and were not in the other. So he developed something which now is known as germ theory, but not in his lifetime did anyone ever believe that washing hands was actually going to be a good thing to do in a hospital. So all of these small little things one can consider as an innovation that progresses us towards better outcomes. And so what I'm talking about today is not some new necessarily sexy thing, but it's the things that we do potentially on an everyday basis. And hopefully in 100 years from now, they'll look back at some of the things we thought were crazy and say, okay, well, those things we now take for granted and are part of our society. But many of those might not survive. There are also good examples from both the civil society and the business world that if there's a bit of an overlap, these things don't necessarily originate only in the social sector. So distance learning did. So Michael Young in the UK founded something called the Open University, which is one of the founding pioneers of distance learning, which has now become quite a big trend, but it's also a multi-billion-dollar industry. And vice versa. Actually, workplace programs for people with disabilities started in the private sector. So what we are learning about social innovation now, it's an emerging field. It's developing literature it's pulling on literature from management theory, from technology, from innovation, from sociology, from positive organizational scholarship. So it's really drawing, and it's cross-cutting. So it's actually quite difficult for me in my journalist work. My background's in science and medicine, and I was always interested in, well, how do we shift the system working in the public healthcare system in South Africa? And then spend 10 years looking around the world at how are people shifting systems. But there's a process, so that's really what I want to share with you. And this is kind of pretty obvious for all of you, but this is a process of innovation. And one starts with a need or an opportunity that prompts one to think about an idea. We develop that idea a little bit further to some kind of proposal. We try these things out in pilots. We try and sustain them. And importantly, we've got to try and assess them. And that's where that line is. And, this is what you do in your everyday work. But what we're learning from some innovation thinking from the commercial world is starting to actually play out in social innovations. And sadly, the amount of research and development that takes place in the commercial world far outweighs anything we do in the social sector. Something to the proportion of 90% more than we spend on R&D. Why can't we get as excited about creating our societies as we do about the latest phone gadget? Why can't we get as positive? Why can't we invest as much R&D into what we do? So what we've learned a lot from technology innovation has been about diffusing. How do we actually? It's not only about scaling a particular project or scaling an organization. There are different ways to scale. Could it be a government policy? Could it be the principles of what we do? Could it be a franchise model? There are all sorts of different ways, and this is some of the work that we're starting to do. And obviously systemic change is what we're all trying to get to, but it's obviously very complex. And so things like the Partnership for Learning Outcomes is exactly one of those things. It's trying to understand how does one shift large systems. We also learn about incremental and radical innovations. So the incremental innovations are the things we do every day in action, critically important. Building on the core, the fundamentals of what we do. So I'm very worried to say that the new solutions are going to be the silver bullets to all our problems. Definitely not. We've got to build on the core of the things that we do well, but we've got to keep improving and understand that it's a continual learning process. And occasionally we've got to be thinking about things that disrupt the system. Can we completely conceive of new ways systems could exist? A preventive system of criminal justice, a low-carbon economy. We're trying to conceive of those things, but really difficult to get those things to move and to create a whole new system, to fully disrupt it. But what's exciting about those kind of disruptions is they lead to further innovations and ideas.